I stumbled through the doorway, my head spinning, my dress wrinkled, and my heels unsteady. The first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains as I locked eyes with Connor, my stepfather, sitting on the couch, his book discarded beside him. His gaze was intense, filled with concern, and something else I couldn't name. What he said next would change everything. "Do you even know what time it is, Lily?" That night, nothing would ever be the same. Life in our house had always felt like walking a tightrope. My name is Lily, and for as long as I can remember, I've been trying to find my place in a world that often feels indifferent. My mom, Freya, is a strong woman, but life hasn't been kind to her. She raised me on her own after my dad walked out on us when I was just 5 years old. For years, it was just the two of us against the world, until Connor came into the picture. Connor changed everything. He was the man who pulled Freya out of her shell, someone who brought laughter back into our home. He was attentive, kind, and exuded a quiet confidence that drew everyone to him. At 48, he looked younger than his years, broad-shouldered with sharp features and streaks of silver in his dark hair. It didn't take long for him to win my mom's heart, and eventually mine too. But not in the way it should have been. At first, I admired him as a stepdaughter might. He was the father figure I'd never had, always ready with advice or a joke to lighten the mood. But somewhere along the way, admiration shifted into something else, something I didn't want to admit to myself. I felt it in the small moments, the way my heart raced when he smiled at me, or the pang of longing I'd suppress when we talked for hours about books, movies, and life. It didn't help that my mom had started to retreat into herself. Freya, who used to be full of life and warmth, now seemed distant, lost in her own world. Connor noticed too. He tried to bridge the gap between them, but the spark between them seemed to dim with every passing day. Meanwhile, my connection with Connor only grew stronger, feeding a tension I didn't know how to escape. I told myself it was harmless. After all, nothing had happened. But the feelings were there, simmering beneath the surface. And that night, when I came home drunk and Connor's gaze met mine, I knew something was about to change. I just didn't know how much. The days after that night felt like a haze, as if the world had shifted in some subtle but undeniable way. I couldn't shake the memory of Connor's gaze as he looked at me in the doorway, the way his voice carried both disappointment and something else I couldn't name. It lingered in my mind, drawing me back to a moment I couldn't undo. Connor had always been attentive, but now every interaction felt different. His usual warmth was still there, but there was a hesitancy in his demeanor, a carefulness that only added to my confusion. I caught myself watching him more often than I should, his easy smile, the way his presence seemed to fill a room. And then there were the small moments, like when our hands accidentally brushed as he handed me a coffee mug, or the way his eyes lingered just a second too long before he looked away. Each one felt like a secret shared between us, a line we were both afraid to cross. Freya, my mom, seemed oblivious to the growing tension. She had become more withdrawn, spending her days lost in her own thoughts. The vibrant woman she used to be felt like a distant memory. She and Connor barely spoke anymore, their conversations polite but hollow, like strangers trying to navigate a shared space. It hurt to see her like that, but it also fueled my guilt. How could I feel this way about the man she loved? Then there was the night I came home late again. I had been at another party, trying to drown out the feelings that had taken root inside me. The alcohol made it easier to forget, until I walked through the door and saw Connor waiting in the dimly lit living room. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled up, and his expression unreadable. "You're drunk again, Lily," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge I couldn't ignore. "What's going on with you?" "I don't know," I mumbled, sinking into the couch. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." He sat down beside me, his movements deliberate. "You've been different lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Was it that obvious? Could he see through the mask I'd been trying so hard to maintain? "It's nothing," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just life, I guess." Connor didn't look convinced, but he didn't push me either. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch light but grounding. "You're better than this, Lily. Whatever's going on, you don't have to go through it alone." His words sent a shiver down my spine. The way he said my name, the concern in his voice, it felt too intimate, too personal. I wanted to pull away, to run from the emotions swirling inside me, but I couldn't. Instead, I sat there frozen, as the weight of the moment pressed down on us both. The tension between us only grew after that night. Our conversations became longer, filled with pauses that felt charged with unspoken words. I started finding excuses to spend more time with him, helping him with errands, joining him for late-night movies in the living room. Each moment felt like stepping closer to a line I couldn't see, but knew was there. And yet, I couldn't stop. There was a part of me that craved his attention, his approval. He saw me in a way no one else did, made me feel understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. But with every glance, every accidental touch, I could feel the cracks widening beneath our feet. I was falling into something I couldn't control, and I didn't know how to stop. As the days turned into weeks, the space between Connor and me seemed to shrink with every interaction. It wasn't deliberate, at least I told myself it wasn't. But the moments we shared began to take on a life of their own, building into something I could no longer ignore. It started with the small things. The way he would glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking, or the lingering pauses in our conversations that seemed to say more than words ever could. Our late-night talks in the kitchen grew longer. The air between us thick with tension I didn't have the courage to address. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. Connor was like a magnet, drawing me in even as I tried to resist. One evening, Freya had gone out with friends, leaving the house unusually quiet. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea when Connor walked in, his hair slightly disheveled, his expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of water. "Something like that," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. He sat across from me, his gaze steady. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "I feel like I'm lost. Like I'm stuck in this limbo." Connor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's normal to feel that way sometimes. But you're stronger than you think, Lily." His words felt like a lifeline, pulling me out of the sea of emotions I'd been drowning in. "You really believe that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I do," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "You're special, Lily. You don't see it, but you are." The way he said it, the way his voice softened, it sent a shiver down my spine. I looked away, trying to hide the blush that crept up my cheeks. "Thank you," I murmured, my hands gripping the edge of the table. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the unspoken growing heavier between us. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, he reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. The warmth of his touch sent a jolt through me, and I froze, unsure of what to do. "Lily," he said softly, his voice carrying an edge of hesitation. "If I've crossed a line." "You haven't," I said quickly, cutting him off. My heart was racing, and I knew I should pull away, but I didn't. Instead, I let the moment linger, the air around us charged with a tension I could no longer deny. Connor pulled his hand back slowly, his expression conflicted. We shouldn't." "I know," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But it's not just me, is it? You feel it too." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Lily, this is complicated. Your mom." "I know," I interrupted, my voice firmer now. "I know it's wrong. I know it's messy. But I can't pretend this isn't happening. I can't pretend I don't feel this way." His eyes met mine again, and for a moment, I thought he might say something that would end it, that would pull us back from the edge. But instead, he stood and walked over to where I was sitting. My breath caught as he crouched beside me, his face level with mine. "This isn't easy for me either," he said, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't quite place. "You're incredible, Lily. But this can't happen. It can't." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at him, my chest tight with a mix of emotions I didn't know how to process. "Then why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why are you saying these things?" Connor hesitated, his hand reaching out to brush a stray tear from my cheek. "Because I care about you," he said finally. "More than I should." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, letting the moment speak for itself. Connor stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair again as if trying to shake off the weight of what had just happened. "You should get some rest," he said finally, his voice distant. "We'll talk tomorrow." But as he walked away, I couldn't help but feel that the line we'd been so carefully avoiding had already been crossed. And deep down, I knew there was no turning back. The weight of what was happening between Connor and me had become impossible to ignore. Every stolen glance, every lingering moment was a thread pulling us closer together, tightening the bond that neither of us could admit aloud. I told myself we hadn't crossed any lines yet, but in my heart, I knew that wasn't true. We had already crossed the most dangerous one, the line of intent. It all came to a head on a rainy Saturday evening. My mom, Freya, had gone out to a friend's birthday dinner, leaving Connor and me alone in the house. I had spent most of the day trying to distract myself, burying my thoughts in books and music, but as the hours dragged on, my resolve began to falter. Connor was in the living room when I finally ventured out of my room. He was sitting on the couch, a book in his hands, but his focus seemed elsewhere. The sound of my footsteps on the hardwood floor made him look up, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I nodded, though it was a lie. "Yeah, just restless, I guess." He gestured to the couch. "Join me?" I was just about to put on a movie. I hesitated, knowing what being near him would do to me, but I found myself walking toward him anyway. I sat at the far end of the couch, trying to maintain some semblance of distance, but it felt futile. The space between us might as well not have existed. The movie played in the background, but neither of us paid much attention. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Every small movement he made, the way he ran a hand through his hair, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the armrest, drew my eyes like a magnet. "Lily," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" My throat tightened. "About what?" He turned to face me, his expression serious. "About us." My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought about lying, about brushing it off like I had so many times before. But something in his gaze made it impossible. "What about us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Connor sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to say this without making it worse, but I feel like we're heading toward something we can't undo." My chest tightened. "What if we already have?" I said, my voice trembling. "What if we crossed that line the moment we let ourselves feel this way?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he stared at the floor. "Lily, I care about you. More than I should. But this can't happen." "Why not?" The words escaped before I could stop them. "Why can't it happen if we both feel the same way?" "Because it's wrong," he said firmly, his voice filled with a mix of frustration and pain. "You're Freya's daughter. She's my wife. This would destroy her." His words were like a bucket of cold water, dousing the fire that had been burning inside me. But even as guilt twisted in my stomach, I couldn't deny the truth. "I know," I said softly, tears welling in my eyes. "I know it's wrong. But I can't stop how I feel, Connor. I've tried and I can't." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a sadness that made my chest ache. "Lily, I need you to listen to me. Whatever this is, whatever we're feeling, it has to end. Now, before it goes too far." Before I could respond, the sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. My mom's voice called out, cheerful and oblivious. "I'm home. Did you two eat dinner yet?" Connor shot to his feet, his expression panicked. "We'll talk later," he said quickly, his voice barely audible. Then he walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there with tears streaming down my face. The next morning, everything came crashing down. I woke to the sound of raised voices coming from the kitchen. I froze, my heart racing as I recognized my mom's voice. "What do you mean? Nothing happened," she was saying, her tone sharp and incredulous. "Do you think I'm stupid, Connor?" I crept to the top of the stairs, my stomach in knots. Connor's voice followed, quieter but no less strained. "Freya, it's not what you think. I swear." "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "I saw the way you two look at each other. I've seen it for weeks. How could you do this to me?" I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My knees buckled, and I had to grip the railing to steady myself. She knew. She had seen through the cracks we'd tried so desperately to hide. "You've betrayed me, Connor," Freya continued, her voice breaking. "And you." She turned toward the stairs, and I realized too late that she'd seen me. "You've betrayed me too, Lily." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at me, her expression a mix of heartbreak and anger. "How could you do this?" she whispered. "How could you do this to your own mother?" "Mom, I'm sorry," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I never meant." "I don't want to hear it," she said, cutting me off. "I don't want your excuses. I need you to leave. Both of you." Her words hung in the air like a death sentence. Connor tried to speak, but she silenced him with a glare. I said leave, and just like that, everything fell apart. The house that had once been my home was no longer mine. The man I had cared for more than I should have was no longer within reach. All I could do was pack my things and walk away, knowing I had destroyed everything I had ever loved. The weight of what happened that morning never left me. My mom's words echoed in my mind long after I left the house, each syllable slicing through me like a blade. "You've betrayed me. Those words felt heavier than any punishment she could have given. The person who had always been my anchor now saw me as someone who had shattered her trust. And she wasn't wrong. Connor and I left separately that day. He tried to speak to me as I stood in the driveway, a suitcase clutched in my trembling hands. Lily, Don't, I whispered, cutting him off. I couldn't bear to hear whatever words he thought might fix this. There were no fixes, no explanations that could make this right. He hesitated, his expression torn, before nodding and walking away. I watched him go, feeling like a part of me was leaving with him, even though I knew it had to be this way. I moved in with a friend, renting a small room in her apartment while I tried to figure out what to do next. My days were filled with silence and regret, my thoughts looping endlessly back to that moment when everything fell apart. I wanted to reach out to my mom, to beg for forgiveness, but every time I picked up the phone, the memory of her tear-streaked face stopped me. What could I say that would make a difference? Nothing. Connor's absence was its own kind of punishment. I hadn't realized how much of my life had become intertwined with his presence until he was gone. Every quiet moment felt like a void, a reminder of the connection I'd lost. I hated myself for missing him, for still wanting him even after everything. But no amount of self-reproach could erase the truth. I loved him, and now that love had cost me everything. The fallout wasn't confined to just the three of us. Word spread quickly through our family and social circle. Whispers turned into rumors, and soon, everyone seemed to know some version of the story. Friends I thought I could rely on avoided my calls, their judgment clear in the silence. At gatherings, I was the unspoken topic, the one people stared at from across the room but never approached. It felt like I was wearing a scarlet letter, my mistakes on full display for everyone to see. Freya, my mom, didn't speak to me for weeks. When she finally did, her words were cold and distant. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, she said during a brief phone call. You've destroyed something I thought was unbreakable. Her words crushed me, but I knew she had every right to feel that way. I wanted to tell her how sorry I was, how much I hated myself for what I'd done. But I also knew that sorry wasn't enough. It wouldn't change the fact that I had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Connor, too, faced the consequences of our actions. Freya filed for divorce not long after that morning, cutting ties with him as decisively as she had with me. He moved out of the house and into a small apartment across town. I heard from mutual friends that he had started seeing a therapist, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. A part of me wanted to reach out to him, to ask if he was okay, but I couldn't. It would only make things worse. One evening, a few months later, I ran into him at a coffee shop. It was the first time I'd seen him since that morning, and the sight of him stopped me in my tracks. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered, but there was still something familiar in his gaze. Lily, he said softly, his voice filled with a mix of surprise and something I couldn't quite place. Ow, how have you been? Okay, I lied, forcing a weak smile. You. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. I'm trying, he said finally. It's been hard. We stood there in awkward silence, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between us. Finally, he broke the tension. I'm glad you're okay, he said, his voice genuine. You deserve to be. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away. You too, I whispered. You deserve to be happy, Connor. We didn't say goodbye. He simply nodded and walked away, leaving me standing there with a coffee cup in my hand and a lump in my throat. It was the closure I didn't know I needed, a reminder that some chapters are meant to end, no matter how much they hurt. Time has a way of dulling even the sharpest pain, but the scars remain. Freya and I are still distant, though she started to let me back into her life in small ways. A text here, a short phone call there. It's not the relationship we once had, but it's a start. As for Connor, I haven't seen him since that day in the coffee shop. I don't know where he is or what he's doing, but I hope he's found peace. The fallout from our choices will always be a part of me, a reminder of how quickly life can unravel when you let emotions overpower judgment. I've learned that love isn't always enough, and sometimes the hardest thing to do is walk away from the people who mean the most to you. But I've also learned that even in the aftermath of destruction, there's room for growth and healing, if you're willing to seek it. Months turned into years, and while life moved forward, the scars of that time never fully faded. They remained, a quiet reminder of the choices I made and the pain they caused. I've come to accept that some wounds don't heal completely. They simply become a part of who you are. And yet, with time, I've found a sense of peace, a hard-won understanding of myself, and the lessons I needed to learn. Rebuilding my relationship with Freya has been a slow and fragile process. There are still moments when her voice carries the weight of resentment, and I can't blame her for that. But there are also moments of softness, an unexpected laugh during a conversation, a rare hug before she leaves. These small gestures remind me that forgiveness, while difficult, isn't impossible. It's a journey, not a destination. Connor, however, is a part of my life that remains firmly in the past. After that chance encounter at the coffee shop, I decided not to reach out again. It was a decision born from love, the kind that recognizes when letting go is the only way to truly care for someone. I wanted him to find happiness even if it wasn't with me, and I knew the same had to be true for myself. For a long time, I struggled to make sense of my feelings, to understand how I had allowed myself to get swept up in something so destructive. Therapy became a lifeline during those difficult months, helping me peel back the layers of guilt, shame, and longing to uncover the deeper truths about myself. I realized that my feelings for Connor weren't just about him. They were about the emptiness I felt within, the parts of me that longed for validation, connection, and love. Through that understanding, I began to rebuild my life. I found new ways to fill the voids that had consumed me for so long. Through friendships, creative pursuits, and most importantly, learning to love myself. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of regret threatened to pull me under. But with each step forward, I felt a little lighter, a little stronger. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that love is complicated. It can be beautiful and transformative, but it can also be dangerous when it blinds you to the consequences of your actions. True love isn't just about passion or connection. It's about respect, boundaries, and the willingness to protect the people you care about, even if it means sacrificing your own desires. I don't tell this story to seek sympathy or forgiveness. I tell it because I hope it can serve as a cautionary tale for anyone standing at a crossroads, tempted by something that feels irresistible but comes with a price. I've paid that price, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone else. To those who may find themselves in a similar situation, I offer this advice: stop. Reflect. Think about the people who will be affected by your choices, not just in the moment, but in the years to come. The thrill of the forbidden is fleeting, but the damage it leaves behind can last a lifetime. Today, my life is quieter, simpler. I've found a sense of contentment in the small things. A morning cup of coffee, a walk in the park, a phone call with a friend. I no longer chase the kind of love that burns too brightly and leaves you scorched. Instead, I've learned to appreciate the steady warmth of self-acceptance and genuine connection. The story of Connor and me is one I'll carry with me forever, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of how far I've come. It's a chapter in my life that has ended, but the lessons it taught me will continue to shape the person I am becoming. If my story resonates with you, take a moment to reflect on your own life and relationships. Are you making choices that align with your values, that honor the people you love? If not, it's never too late to change course. Growth is always possible, even after the hardest of falls. What would you do if you were in my position? Have you ever faced a decision that could change everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated on more stories that explore the complexities of love, betrayal, and redemption. Trust me, the next story will leave you speechless. Stay tuned.